If it seems particularly festive in here with my fans, it's because I'm in the middle of doing a successful licensing collections party edition where we do show and share parties. So this week I've been partying on Zoom and looking at other designers' art and critiquing, and it's been really awesome. Speaking of critiquing, that is what today's video is about. About 6 months ago, I did a video where I critiqued some of my subscribers' art, and you should definitely check that video out because I gave a lot of great tips that could apply to your own art. And today I decided that I wanted to do that again. It was something that people really enjoyed. So I reached out to my subscribers, and if you're not on my list, like, what are you even doing? You should definitely be on my list. So you can subscribe below. But I reached out to my subscribers and asked them to submit some work if they wanted to be critiqued on my YouTube channel. I know that one of the hardest things about being an independent artist and getting into a new industry, whether it's surface pattern design, whether it's illustration, whether it's any other form of art for products, which is what we do here on this channel, I know the hardest thing about that is being independent and not having that feedback from bosses, creative directors, people who can guide you on your journey to create better art, more marketable art, art that works better on products. And as someone who has been in this industry creating art for products as patterns and illustrations for over 20 years, I do have a certain amount of expertise on the subject of what makes art marketable. So there is always going to be a certain amount of subjectivity when it comes to looking at art and design. If you go to 10 different experts, they will give you different things to work on about your art. And at the end of the day, an art director might love something that somebody else totally hates. That being said, when you're creating art for commercial markets, the best way to understand if it can work in the market, besides launching it, getting it out there, sending it to people, is to look at what's happening in the market. And I'm gonna definitely harp on that today in this video. Thanks to everyone who submitted. That bravery, that being willing to put your art in front of someone for judgment's purposes means that you're going to go far in this business, because that is a skill you need to have in order to get clients, right? You need to be able to be willing to put your art out there, send it directly to people who can make decisions and move forward. So I'm so grateful for my subscribers for that. I have 3 artists' work to share with you today, to give them some tips, but also to give you some tips. You might not have the exact same art, but the type of things that I'm looking for and that art directors are going to be looking for when we talk about marketable art, I'm sure this can benefit you as well. So take a look. Our first artist is Ania Marta Art. Thank you so much, Ania, for sharing. So before I even dive into some of the information that they submitted on the forms, I took a look through everyone's art. And what I really like about this collection is it's a really sweet theme. I mean, literally and figuratively. We love food themes around here. I personally do, but also they're very saleable. Cupcakes, pretzels, donuts, so much fun. Also, we have some really well-drawn motifs here. Let's look closely. These cupcakes are really nice. We know exactly what they are. We can understand the frosting. Everything looks really pretty. It's really pleasing to the eye. So that really appeals to me as well. And then I would say that the third thing that I really like about this is this clear, easy to see layout of her art. Don't underestimate this. I was looking through 20 or 30 submissions of art for this call out that I gave to my subscribers, and I was a little bit playing art director for a bit. And yes, of course, I was looking at the actual art on the page, but easy to see, clearly labeled art makes it so much easier to appreciate the actual designs. I have free templates for this in my toolkit if that's something that you need help with. So now let's take a look at what she answered. My first question that I always ask when I'm looking at other designers' work is, what end product were you thinking when you created these? Or if you haven't thought about that before you created, what end product are you thinking now that it's finished? Honestly, I recommend that you do think about it before you create it. Even when you're creating patterns that might go on multiple products, thinking about a specific end product can really help you focus in on what themes make the most sense, what kind of layouts make the most sense. If you told me these designs were for men's athletic wear, I would have very different advice than if you told me that these designs were for wrapping paper, right? So Ania says that she was thinking stationery or maybe children's decor, which would be wallpaper or fabric. So I can definitely see this for stationery and also for fabric. Probably not for wallpaper. We sometimes see food on wallpaper, but maybe not a whole collection of foods. I'm definitely not a wallpaper expert. It's one product that I really haven't designed for, and I've designed for a lot of different products. So this is definitely a hole in my knowledge, but just based on living in a world where I see wallpaper, I very rarely see food wallpaper unless it's in a specialty shop, right? Like maybe an ice cream shop might have ice cream wallpaper, but often we don't see that. So I could see this for stationery, but let me give some pointers on that front to both Ania and to anyone who has a pattern collection that they think would work for stationery. Think about what stationery products specifically, that's pretty generic. Is it going to be notepads? Is it going to be note cards? Is it going to be a desk set that has like a mix of, Post-it notes and pens and to-do lists? As always, do market research. If it is going to be notebooks, if it is going to be Post-it notes, if it is going to be note cards, what kind of layouts do you need? You might need less patterns, and you might need to do one or two standalone illustrations. Maybe this is a single illustration, much larger, and that is the center of a card. As a pattern collection, if this was for fabric, I do have a few suggestions. One thing I would point out is consistency in line work would bring this together a little bit more. So what I mean by that is, one thing that stands out here is she has these really soft kind of airbrushed colors, and then she has these little defining lines, which is a really nice technique, very pretty. But then she doesn't really use that line work anywhere else. I see it a little bit here, which is great, but like she could add a couple highlight lines around these pretzels, one or two stripes across this plaid pie. It could just be worked in a little bit more. The same with the donuts, defining the frosting a little bit. I always talk about consistency throughout our work within a pattern collection, okay? You don't have to have the same consistent style in different collections. I sometimes do things that are more watercolory, or sometimes do things that are more flat and modern, but within one collection, you want to have consistent work. And I actually have a video with tips about how to make cohesive collections. So definitely check that out for more tips about bringing a collection together. The next thing I wanted to point out when I look at this collection is probably when she was creating this collection, she's thinking about treats. Obviously, she thought of cupcakes. She had a really clever idea about making a grid with like lattice work pies, the donuts, etc. And then she was thinking about accessories that go with that, and cake stands came to mind. And certainly, that fits in with the theme, but as its own print, just one type of cake stand as an icon is a little bit abstract. If you were to just see this pattern and nothing else, would you be interested in that pattern? And, when we talk about coordinates, it's not that your secondary or your sort of ditzy blender prints need to be the most interesting. But what they do need to do is make sense. So sometimes my ditzy blenders are just like one little flower tossed around or a tiny stripe or something like that. And it's not that interesting, I admit, but someone might use it because it's simple and it's fun. But I think that this is a little bit strange just to have the cake stands. If you hadn't seen the rest of the collection, you might not even be sure that they were cake stands. You kind of would be like, what is this shape and why is it being repeated? So I would probably eliminate this print. I don't think she needs it because she has so many other great prints in this collection. My last piece of advice for this particular design collection is to rein in the palette a little bit. When we look at these top designs, we're seeing some really soft, beautiful colors. And then we move down and we have some really dark, harsh colors, this dark navy and this dark brown. And it's not that we can't use those colors, but they're not really used up here, and it just gives a really different impression. I would probably, and even this red, which is used in the pie, but this particular pattern, I would maybe change this red to the blue, and this really dark color. I mean, one thing you could do is make it the chocolate color so that at least you have two prints that have chocolate, because this navy doesn't show up anywhere else in this pattern collection. So it's sort of like, why are we using that? We want to have the same colors. If we pick, 10 colors, we want them to be mostly consistent throughout. So those are some recommendations for this as a whole. Whether you're going to move forward with stationery and you add a few illustrations, or you stick with all patterns, but you add some consistent line work and sharpen up the palette a little bit, I think this is a great collection. So I would probably eliminate this navy. I would maybe soften this brown a little bit, but then use the brown here, and I would probably make this red a blue. That's probably how I would move forward with this. And her main question was, is this ready for pitching? And my answer is yes, it's still very well done, right? I'm nitpicking because I said I would critique designs, but this is still a really beautiful collection. It's well laid out. Yes, there could be tweaks. We can always improve our work, but honestly, starting sooner rather than later with pitching is always a good idea. Thank you so much for sharing, Ania. You did a great job. I hope these are some helpful tips for you. Okay, our next artist sharing with us is Kacey Cowdry. Thank you so much, Kacey, for sharing your work. So this is what I received from Kacey, and I want to talk about what I like first, as I always like to do. The first is the theme, which is leaves, nature. Leaves and botanicals are an evergreen, perennial favorite. These are things that work for almost every type of product, whether it's apparel, home decor, gift, stationery. Nature, leaves, botanicals are always a theme that's needed. The next thing I really like about this collection is that it's in a really interesting modern take on leaves with geometrics and outlines and some really interesting textures that we're seeing. So I like this update. It's different. It's not just the typical leaf shape that we see. So that is a really fun twist. And the last thing that stood out to me is overall, I do think that this palette is very saleable. I'm going to talk a little bit more about palette in a minute, but what we're seeing here, these nice soft greens and beiges and grays with these pops of color is fun. And I think that this could really work as far as a color scheme goes. All right. So the product that she had in mind was home decor or commercial decor, but she also asked the question, what market would be best, as her question. So I think she is still working out, which is fine. Commercial decor is an interesting thought, and it does reframe this a bit for me. And I'll note some ways that this could come into play as I talk through it. The first thing I wanted to talk about when I look at this work is I had mentioned when we were looking at Ania's work that the well-organized page was a major pro. And I think both this collection and this page could benefit from some curation. Now, I can understand Kacey's enthusiasm here. She tells a story. She's sprinkling leaves everywhere because she made these cool motifs. And so she's using it in all places. She has her whole palette. She even has an artist picture here. We know that she's enthusiastic about this. She put some time into this, and that's really awesome. But I will say it is a little bit overwhelming and kind of chaotic to look at. And it doesn't highlight what is supposed to be the main attraction. And what is the main attraction? If you look at this visually, the things that stand out are honestly the things that are the darkest and biggest. So first of all, the bright orange stands out, but also this text right here really stands out and is the story of how beautiful leaves are really the main point of this collection? No, what should be the main point of this collection is, of course, the art, right? So I would just say before we even dive into the art, something like this really shows off your work a lot better. Okay, having your two main prints up top and biggest, and then a few other prints below with one mock-up, maybe two mock-ups, and then whatever the title is and your logo. This is a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier to see your work. And I did some editing because you do have a lot of patterns here, right? You have 8, 9, 10 patterns, 2 mock-ups, and as I said, a lot of extra stuff around here that isn't totally necessary. So when I was looking at multiple designs, this was a little bit more difficult to kind of see through and actually pay attention to the artwork. So that is my first main tip. So that will make a big difference. But now let's talk about the actual art that we have here. My first tip to Kacey and to other artists who kind of relate to this style of design is to beware of too much use of what I call the stamp method. So when you create one or maybe two motifs, in this case, it would be a leaf. Each of these patterns has, this pattern maybe has 4 leaves. We've got, no, it's really just one, but some are outlines and some are filled in. So it's this diamond with circles on one side. It looks like that's kind of true of pretty much all of these designs, right? She created one fun leaf and then she stamped it over and over and over again in different directions. So I always recommend, especially for hero prints, to think about varying your motifs. And she did vary the motifs in that she has these outlined and colored in. She has these colored in, and then she has just outlined. So she made some changes, but it's all this one type of leaf, which is Mongolian oak. But we know, because I see all these coordinates, she has these different types of leaves, this silver birch, aspen, ginkgo, redbud. So for this hero print, I'd love to see some of those leaves all together. And I'd also, even though this is, quite geometric, the idea of the leaves interacting a little bit more rather than just being stamped on top of each other. So maybe the stems curve a little bit. Then we have a ginkgo here. And then over here, maybe it's an aspen, you know, something where they're working a little bit together in clusters rather than being stamped on top of each other and competing with each other. Right here, this feels like a competition of like which one can you see most versus if they're in group clusters, then they're harmonizing, right? So that would be my suggestion, especially for the hero, to mix some of these different types of leaves because you have all the motifs, just put them together. That brings me to my next point, which is these visually competing shapes. You have definitely created a little bit of a definition by having these tonal light in the background, dark on top, which is a great move. You can definitely do like lighter tones underneath to really create some sort of hierarchy. But in some cases, things really have the same weight and it really feels like a competition. I would say here, it's not necessarily the weight, but this yellow layered on top is really fighting. This one, yes, I can see one dark leaf, but because the ones behind are so huge, there's a lot of competition because they're not quite light enough. I'd say here is sort of similar. It's like I can tell it's lighter, but there's just a lot of fighting going on. And you created these beautiful motifs. So again, you want them to work together, kind of harmonizing. Maybe there's less overlapping. And then finally, we talked about the palette being good, and I do think it's a really lovely, but I would love you to narrow it down a little bit from what you're showing. So we talked about curation, potentially doing a market study on home decor or commercial trends. You know, commercial is really interesting because honestly, I don't know a lot about it, but it's like office spaces, maybe it's hotel spaces, corporate spaces. But one thing from my own experiences, again, living out and going to doctor's offices and going to different places, is I do feel like you often see these really toned down, really neutral palettes, but with a little pop of color. And that is what you're doing here. You have a lot of neutrals and you have these fun little bright pops. So again, I think you're doing a great job with that, but I would just sort of narrow down the palette because right now you have a lot of colors showing here and it's not as cohesive as it could be. You have this kind of neutral and then this neutral, which is like more green. This is more beige. You have gray. You have white. This one, I guess, is back to the cream. You got black. You just have a lot of colors going on. I feel like you could get this down to 6 colors. Maybe it's 8 colors if you're counting the pops. So maybe you have a little purple and a little orange, but mostly it's, sticking to 2 light neutrals, 2 medium neutrals, and 2 darker neutrals. I think you have that ability to really dial it in, and that's going to make this a stronger collection. So her question, as I kind of alluded to earlier, was what market would this work best for? And I do think this maybe needs a little bit more development before we put it into a specific market, but that research that I talked about will help determine this. So if you're thinking commercial market, first of all, pay attention to spaces that you're in. Pay attention to office buildings or next time you go to a hotel. But also you can Google and see what are you seeing on wallpapers and what are you seeing on curtains. I'm seeing you have a mock-up for curtains here. What type of patterns, what type of colors, what are you seeing? And how can you get maybe a little bit closer in some cases with your palette and with your repeats. So that's my suggestion for Kacey, but nice work, nice, interesting theme. Thank you so much for submitting. And I'm excited to see how this develops. Okay, and our final artist that I'm going to be looking at is Tamar Feifer of Tamar Hope Designs. And this is what Tamar submitted, which is really, really fun. So, things that I like about this art. First of all, the watercolor technique. Really pretty. I am not a watercolor artist. I am not that skilled at it. And these flowers, these cows, really, really sweet. I love the watercolor technique. And hand painting is always in demand. I also really like how this art was made different with these cute accessories. Adding the florals and adding the glasses is a super smart touch. It's really marketable. It's fun. It makes this really interesting to look at. And then finally, I love these charming coordinates. These are really, really sweet, and I just really enjoy the repeats, and overall this is a really fun collection. So the product that Tamar had in mind was fabric. She said panels and yardage. If you don't know, sometimes fabric comes with big images that you can then make like a throw pillow out of, or put a big image on a quilt or something like that. And then obviously the repeating patterns can be used for pretty much anything. So this tracks for me as a end product because brick is not only popular, but honestly, there are not that many themes that don't work on fabric. It's really just what the end user might create. So when we were talking about Ania's and I said, it makes a big difference if this is for men's athletic wear. Well, if it's fabric, you can make men's athletic wear if the patterns made sense, or you can make throw pillows for home decor. So it's really what you're sewing, and most themes work pretty well for fabric. Obviously, there are certain themes that maybe are more popular, but this certainly can work for fabric. I think this is a really sweet collection, as I said, but if Tamar wanted to take this a little further and make it even better, here are some of my suggestions. The first would be to try some different color backgrounds. Now, I know this is hard with watercolor because it definitely leads to having to do more digital editing because you kind of have to cut out around the image and then put in the background color. And the background color, I definitely recommend if you're doing watercolor, should have a sort of watercolor texture to it. So, I mean, it certainly adds some more work to the process, but I do think that this could add some interest to this collection because everything is on white. Now, this stripe doesn't particularly look like a watercolor stripe. It looks like it was created digitally. I love that it is organic, and so it does go along with the watercolors. So this would be a really easy one to put on a different color ground, whether it's kind of the red from the ears, or maybe it's the yellow, or maybe it's the blue and then it's a yellow stripe. I think you have some options there. And maybe just one of these prints. Potentially, I don't know, either of these could work and look really nice. My next call out would be that even though you did a really fun job adding these accessories to make these cows look a little bit different, I think it would be great to see a second cow painted. And again, you made some tweaks. You kind of turned the head here, but this is certainly the same cow base. Even if you didn't paint the entire cow and you just painted some new ears and a nose and you flipped the head and kind of pieced it together digitally, I think that could make it really interesting and add some variety to what's happening here. And then, while the glasses and the flowers do a good job of distinguishing, I love this one with the butterfly on the nose. So cute. You switched it up in the repeats, which is really nice. Having a second cow head to kind of play with would make this even more fun. And my final comment here would be about presentation. Now, again, this was a submit to me. It's not a submit to an art director, so this isn't really a problem. But while this is super clear and well laid out, it did not come with your name along the bottom or top or anywhere. It's only in the file itself. And I always recommend, if you were submitting this to art directors, and again, I know this was just to me, so it wasn't necessarily expected to be final product, but just a hot tip for anyone who's watching: if you're ever sending out artwork, you want your name and your contact information on all of the pages, not just in file names, because there's times when art directors will print out things and put them on boards, and you want to make sure that your information does not get lost in case it's on a board that gets pulled into a meeting that then gets chosen, and then somehow they can't track down the original email or who sent it. So be sure that your information is on everything. And again, it can be subtle. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a big logo. It can literally just be your name typed along the bottom. And maybe your email address or your website or all three, but just make sure that that's included. So her question was, my repeats are a little simple. I'd love some tips for up-leveling my work. Well, of course, I did just give a few, but I did not specifically talk about your repeats. I do think you have some really lovely repeats. But I do have a pattern layout guide, which is super free. It is free in my Surface Pattern Boss toolkit. You can download that, and it can give you some tips on different styles of patterns. And if you want to level up easily, I have a very popular pattern wireframe library. It's a super inexpensive tool that you can use to base your pattern designs on. It's kind of like grid work. Well, they're not all grids because it's different patterns. But again, wireframe to help you lay out your designs in different ways. I'll put all these links in the description. So that can help you find some new and interesting layouts for your patterns. Really great job, Tamar. Thank you so much for submitting. All right, I hope that was helpful. As I've said, get on my mailing list, honestly. This is the second time I've done this in the course of 6 months, offered these spots open, and I sometimes open up, at least twice a year, I feel like, sometimes open up one-on-one paid portfolio review spots, and I am planning to open up some spots in the next month. So get on that list, because I'll be announcing those spots to my list. I don't make a big deal out of them on social media or on YouTube or anything like that. But if you're on my list, then you know, and you can grab one of those spots before they're gone. But also, I've talked about a few different things that are available to my list, including that free layout guide and the templates for arranging your art. So get some of those resources in the Surface Pattern Boss toolkit below. Ready to transform your surface pattern design journey? Discover the power of product category niches with my valuable masterclass, Find Your Focus. Unlock the key to progress by understanding the type of products your art could fit on and choosing the perfect product category to showcase your unique style. Don't let uncertainty and trying to do all the things hold you back. Click the link in the description below to enroll now and find focus today.